Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. And today I'm going to be talking about more ways that you can decode the meaning of occult symbols. I've spoken before about occult symbols that use certain astrological signs, geomantic figures, magical alphabets. Today I'm going to be remaining on the subject of talismans, but talking about another specific type of talisman. Certain types of talismans that derive their symbolism from the use of a number or letter square, and by using and understanding that number and letter square, you can effectively decode the meaning of that symbol. So let's jump straight into it. I'll begin with number squares. Number squares, or magic squares as they're often called, have been around since the Middle Ages, but in the context of planetary talismans, they were really popularized by Cornelius Agrippa in the 1400s, 1500s, as a type of number square that you can use to then generate sigils for a spirit, in particular a planetary spirit. Now there's a few different layers to a magic square. The first thing you need to realize is that there's 7 types of number square. There is a number square that is 3 squares across by 3 squares down. There's a number square that's 4 squares across by 4 squares down, all the way up to the number 9. And this is referring to the 7 classical planets. And so to figure out which number square goes to which planet, you first need to understand the numbers that are significant or sacred to each planet and the reason for that. So this is where we get back into the Kabbalah. If you haven't seen my videos on the Kabbalah yet, sometimes pronounced Kabbalah, go check out that playlist for some important background. And if you have watched those videos, you'll know that you've got the map of the cosmos, the tree of life, which is comprised of the 10 Sephiroth, or spheres. Each one has a number from 1 to 10, and the 7 classical planets in Hermetic Kabbalah are attributed to 7 of these 10 spheres or sephira, specifically spheres 3 through to 9. So sephira 3 is Saturn, sephira 4 is Jupiter, sephira 5 is Mars, sephira 6 is the Sun, sephira 7 is Venus, sephira 8 is Mercury, and sephira 9 is the Moon. And so each magic square belongs to the planet whose sacred number, using Hermetic Kabbalah, is the square root of the total number of squares in that magic square. So it's like a grid with a total number of squares. So, as an example, the 5 by 5 grid would be attributed to Mars, which has the number 5 in this symbolic schematic. So once you've got the number of squares in your grid, the next thing that goes into creating a magic square is that all of the numbers of squares, in this case there's 25, so all the numbers 1 to 25 will appear once in that grid. But they won't just appear in any order at all. The order in which the numbers are put in the grid such that every row and every column will add up to the same number. It's kind of like a game of magical Sudoku. It's one way of thinking about it. So if you look at the magic square of Mars and you add up the numbers in each row and each column, every time you'll get the number 65. So that is another number that is considered sacred to Mars. And there is a fourth and final number that you can derive from a magic square, such as this, and that is you add up all of the numbers that appear in the square. In this case, all the numbers 1 to 25, which in this instance will give you the number 325. So we have a magic number square that conceals 4 numbers that are sacred or coded symbols for the planet Mars. The number 5, the number 25, the number 65, and the number 325. Okay, but generating numbers that are sacred to each classical planet is not the only trick that you can do with these magic squares. Another thing that you can do is you can actually use the magic square as a kind of a cipher, which will allow you to trace a sigil for a planetary spirit. So, I'll explain exactly what that means. I'll again use the square of Mars as an example, but first it's story time. And I want to tell you a story about the famous rocket scientist Jack Parsons, who was around during World War II, also a brilliant occultist. He was at one time friends with a man who would go on to be a notorious cult leader. I won't mention him by name because this particular cult has got a reputation for taking out frivolous lawsuits against anybody who says anything unfavourable about them. But from that alone, you can probably guess who it is. Anyway, Jack Parsons and this particular cult leader had a falling out because said cult leader scammed Parsons out of quite a bit of money and then took to the high seas in a boat. So as an act of revenge, Jack Parsons summoned Barzabel, the spirit of Mars, to call up a tempest, which resulted in said cult leader's boat being marooned. So Barzabel is a planetary spirit who has become quite infamous in occult circles. And the origin of this spirit Barzabel is actually as one of the spirits who Agrippa attributes to the planet Mars. And Agrippa groups Barzabel's sigil together with the other spirits of Mars, or the intelligence of Mars. He groups together with the magic square of Mars. Each of the sigils that Agrippa groups with its planetary magic square is a sigil which is in some way derived from the magic square. And I'm going to demonstrate how that's done now. So in order to understand how this process works, the first thing you need to know is Gematria. This is the idea that with the Hebrew language in particular, each letter of the Hebrew alphabet can be attributed to a number and vice versa. So the first 9 letters of the Hebrew alphabet are attributed to the numbers 1 through 9. The next 9 are attributed to the numbers 10 through 90. And then the last 4 are attributed to the numbers 100 to 400. And it's a bit more complicated than that, but that's the bare bones of Gematria. So here's Barzabel's name, Hebrew spelling, also transliterated into English letters, and of course written from right to left as Hebrew is. And underneath the letters you'll see I've put a number. This is the value of each of the Hebrew letters according to Gematria, and now you'll see there are certain numbers in brackets. This is where I've reduced down a number that ends in 1 or more zeros to its root number. And the reason why I've done this is because those bigger numbers are reduced down for the purposes of the magic squares and using the magic squares to derive planetary sigils. Okay, so if we go back to the magic square itself, so you'll see that the number 2 repeats twice there, first of all, so we can have a little bump for the first 2, and then from there we trace a line to the number 9, and then from there we've got the number 1 appearing, so we trace a line from 9 to 1, and then from there we've got 2 and 1, and we trace a line to 12 for that. I'll explain why in a moment. And then from there we trace a line to the final number 3. The reason for tracing the line to 12, as we've done here, is because, as I've explained, the Hebrew letters, the value of them always ends in 0. It's always a multiple of 10 or one of the digits from 1 to 9. So in a situation where you have a number like 12, for the purposes of the magic square and generating letters from that, they can be converted into digits, or sometimes the 1 at the front can be given the value of 10, for example. But in this instance, each digit is considered a letter, A and B respectively. And so you've got 2 letters appearing in a single square. And so the end result of all of that is when you have traced the letters of Bart's spell in this fashion, you end up with a particular symbol. And when you do a little bit of stylization of that sigil, you end up with something that looks like this. And this is, of course, the sigil of Bart's spell. So that's number squares. But there's another type of grid that you might have seen in the context of Western ceremonial magic, particularly talismanic magic, and that is the letter square. So perhaps the most famous example of a letter square used in magic dates all the way back to the 1st century of the Common Era, the so-called Sator letter square, which looks like this. It contains 25 letters in a 5x5 grid. It's a palindrome in terms of how it's read, and you'll see that there are 2 words which are an anagram of 2 other words, and of course it can be read the same way crossways as downward in a series of columns. Now, so you'll see here that magic squares incorporate anagrams, and they also incorporate being able to be read in multiple directions, across and down. And another layer of symbolism in letter squares such as this is often that the particular words hold significance in terms of the intent behind the construction of the letter square. And sometimes, because of the palindrome format, when the letters appear in the reverse order, there will be some extra meaning to that. In this case, Sator and Rotas each have a distinct meaning. Sometimes that won't be the case, but it's always worth checking to see how many different layers of meanings and connected meanings there are to a letter square. Perhaps the most famous example of a letter square, or a series of letter squares, are the Abramelin squares. These are made famous in the book of The Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. Very powerful talismans, but very enigmatic. But once you get past the fact that they just look like a jumble of letters, you can start to see that there's little words hidden in them, often Hebrew words again. And by understanding those words, you can understand a little bit about the intent behind the talisman. So that's what I've got to say about number squares and letter squares. I hope you found that informative. Again, I hope you learned something. Leave your comments down below. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel to support my work. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.